Imagine you're using your banking application to transfer money. Within seconds, the app verifies your identity, checks your account balance, processes the payment, sends the notification, and updates your transaction history. It feels like one application is doing everything, right? But behind the scenes, multiple independent services are working together. This is the power of service based architecture, an architectural style that breaks a large application into independent business services while still keeping the system simple to manage. In this session, we will understand what is service based architecture with banking example. So, the service based architecture is an architectural style where an application is divided into multiple business services, right? Multiple business services. Each service is responsible for a specific business capability. For example, instead of one large application handling everything, we might have customer service, account service, payment service, notifications, transaction service. Each service performs its own business function and communicates with other services when needed. Unlike a traditional layered monolithic, the application is organized around the business capabilities instead of a single code base. Now, let us understand this with an example. Suppose a customer transfers 10,000 rupees using a mobile banking application. What are the sequence of steps involved? First, the customer submits the transfer request for 10,000 rupees. Now, the authentication service verifies the customer's identity. The account service checks whether the sender has enough balance. Pay attention to the services here, right? The authentication service verifies the customer identity, right? One, authentication service, right? The account service verifies whether the sender has the enough account balance or the account exists or not, right? The account details. Now, third is payment service. Payment service. Payment service processes the transfer. Next, transaction service. Service records the transaction. The notification service sends an SMS or email or push notification confirming the transfer is successful. Now, there are five services involved from the customer submitting the request to the sending notification of a successful transfer. Authentication service to identify customers' credentials. The account service to get the account details and do the balance validations. Payment service to process the actual payment, credit or debit to the respective accounts. transaction service to fulfill the transaction, right? Where the actual money transfer is happening, the notification service to notify both the users, the sender and the receiver about the transfer. Here, each service focuses on a single business responsibility. The authentication will not interrupt with the operations of account. Same, the accounts will not interrupt with the payments. Together, they complete the entire banking transaction. So, the service-based architecture is independent business service architecture, right? There are multiple business services handling their own job. And unlike microservice architecture, the service-based architecture often uses a shared database, making the data management simpler. In microservices, every service has its own copy of database, right? And the service-based architecture offers service communications through APIs or lightweight messaging. If there is a communication needed between two services, authentication or accounts, accounts or payments, payments or transactions, right? Then that happens through APIs, a dedicated public APIs. And the service-based architecture is also handles independent business logic. Business rules are distributed across services instead of being concentrated in one large application. One service handle your own business rules. How the user should be verified is taken care by authentication service. And the account responsibilities are tied to account service. Right? Now, why the service-based architecture is better when compared to some of the similar architectures, the microservice architecture, right? Or the layered architecture. It provides obviously the better modularity as we have independent separate services and easier maintenance. If you compare with layered architecture, the application is divided into technical capabilities, presentation layer, business layer, data access layer, and database layer. But here, the application is divided into the services, the business capabilities, what the authentication service should do, what is its business capability, right? So obviously, it provides the better modularity and easier maintenance. Also, it provides reusability, right? We can make calls to any independent service and use based on the requirement. And it provides faster deployment because all the services are independent and are simple and are in modular architecture, right? Now, the deployment of one service is not dependent on other service, and it provides faster and better scalability. If you want to add new service, right? Maybe transaction history will be handled by transaction. We can add kind of to track the spending nature of a user, right? Maybe usage summary, right? To track how much is spent on what particular category, on shopping or on account transfers, right? So if we want to add new service, it is just you develop the service independently and if required, call the existing APIs and launch it, right? The other services are not at all affected. But the service-based architecture can also pose some of the dependencies. The shared database is the critical dependency. If multiple services rely on the same database, changes to the database can affect several services, right? One change required for authentication service should also be incorporated in other services. If you change one variable, which was the requirement coming from authentication service, then if the payment transaction notifications, usage summary, if they are referring to that particular variable, then they also need to be updated. It also increases the operational complexity. Compared to layered monolithic, there are more services to develop, deploy, monitor, and maintain. And it should always be kept in consideration that the APIs are updated, the dependent services are using the latest APIs, they are versioned properly, right? Now, service-based architecture also adds communication overhead, right? We just have seen that if authentication has to call accounts, there is a API. Same for other services too. Any communication has to go through API. That increases the communication overhead, right? And compared to microservice architecture, it is not as independent as microservices, right? Even though the services are separate, shared infrastructure and shared database can reduce the independence. Database is the critical part of service-based architecture. In nutshell, the service-based architecture divides an application into business-focused services such as customer, payment, transactions, notifications, authentication, usage summary. This improves modularity, maintainability, scalability, while remaining less complex than a full microservice architecture. So, if the application has grown beyond a traditional layer monolithic, but doesn't require the complexity of microservices, then the service-based architecture can be an excellent middle ground. If you want to know more about the other architectural styles that we are referring to in this session, please take a look at the series. We have sessions covered on different topics of software architecture as well as the other architectural styles. Thank you.